A routine drive home. Flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. For most, it is a minor inconvenience, a momentary spike in heart rate. But when a decorated federal judge is yanked from her luxury sedan by an officer determined to prove she doesn't belong in it, a simple traffic stop becomes a brutal collision of power, prejudice, and pride. He thought she was just another statistic. He had no idea he had just handcuffed the very woman who could dismantle his entire precinct. The rain had been falling in a steady, relentless sheet since 3 in the afternoon, slicking the asphalt of Oak Ridge Boulevard into a dark, mirror-like canvas. At 11:45 p.m., the streets of the affluent, tree-lined suburb were practically deserted. Honorable Cynthia Montgomery, a United States District Judge for the Federal Circuit, navigated the winding roads with the practiced ease of someone who had driven this exact route for 15 years. She was exhausted. It had been a grueling week presiding over a massive multi-state corporate fraud docket. Her mind was still buzzing with objections, sustained motions in the endless drone of defense attorneys. All she wanted was to pull her sapphire blue 2025 BMW 7 Series into her heated garage, pour a glass of Cabernet, and sleep. The car was a recent indulgence, a 60th birthday present to herself, celebrating 35 years of an unblemished legal career that had taken her from a gritty public defender's office to a lifetime appointment on the federal bench. As she passed the stone-pillared entrance of the Oak Ridge Country Club, a flash of red and blue erupted in her rearview mirror. Cynthia sighed, her shoulders dropping. She checked her speedometer. 34 in a 35 zone. Her tags were up to date, renewed just last month. Her taillights were perfectly functional. Perhaps a tail light is out, she thought mildly, signaling and carefully pulling over onto the shoulder, ensuring she left plenty of room for the officer to approach safely. She shifted the luxury sedan into park, rolled down her window and turned on the interior dome light. As a woman who had spent decades navigating the complexities of the justice system, she knew the drill. Keep your hands visible. 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. No sudden movements. In the rear-view mirror, she watched the silhouette of a police officer step out of the cruiser. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a swaggering urgency that immediately put Cynthia on edge. The blinding glare of his flashlight cut through the rain, reflecting off the side mirror and directly into her eyes. Officer Derek Lawson approached the driver's side, his hand resting heavily on the butt of his service weapon. Behind him, a younger officer, Brian Higgins, lingered near the cruiser's passenger door, looking uncomfortable in the downpour. License, registration, and proof of insurance, now Lawson barked. No good evening, no explanation for the stop. Just a sharp authoritative demand laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of hostility. Cynthia squinted against the beam of the flashlight, keeping her voice level and calm. Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over? I'm not here to answer your questions, Lawson snapped, leaning closer, the smell of wet wool and stale tobacco wafting into the leather-scented interior of the BMW. I said license and registration. Do not make me ask you again. Cynthia's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She had dealt with hostile witnesses, arrogant prosecutors, and violent defendants, but the raw, unprovoked aggression emanating from this patrolman was jarring. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat, she said deliberately, narrating her actions to ensure there was no misunderstanding. My registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for my purse first. Just get the damn cards, Lawson interrupted, shining the light directly into her face again. Cynthia reached over, unzipped her leather tote, and extracted her wallet. She pulled out her state driver's license and handed it through the window. Then she leaned over to open the glove box, retrieving the crisp registration document. Lawson snatched the papers from her hand. He didn't look at the name on the license. He didn't look at the matching name on the registration. He simply glared at Cynthia, his eyes scanning her conservative gray suit, her pearls, and then panning around the high-end interior of the vehicle. "Whose car is this?" Lawson asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "It is my car, officer," Cynthia replied, her tone polite but firm. "As you can see on the registration." "I see a piece of paper," Lawson retorted, stepping back slightly. "What I don't see is how you afford a $120,000 vehicle." "Step out of the car." Cynthia froze. The legal parameters of a traffic stop rushed through her mind. Pennsylvania VMIMS gave him the authority to order her out of the vehicle, but the blatant profiling, the complete disregard for the valid documentation in his handed, was a textbook violation of standard procedure, bordering on a civil rights violation under the Fourth Amendment. "Officer," Cynthia said, her voice dropping an octave into the commanding register she used in her courtroom, "I have provided you with my valid license and registration. You have not articulated reasonable suspicion for this stop, nor have you explained why you are ordering me out of my vehicle in the pouring rain. I am a resident of this neighborhood. I live 3 blocks away." Lawson scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Yeah, I'll bet you do. I ran the plates. System flagged them. Vehicle as reported stolen out of Westbridge County. Now I am giving you a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle before I drag you out." Cynthia's heart hammered against her ribs. Stolen? That was impossible. She bought the car brand new from the dealership less than 6 months ago. The plates were issued directly to her. There was no flag. She knew instantly what had happened. He had either run the wrong plate deliberately, or he was fabricating the probable cause entirely because a black woman driving a flagship luxury car in Oak Ridge Boulevard didn't fit his narrow, prejudiced world view. "Officer Lawson," she said, reading his nameplate. "If you run the plates again, carefully, you will see they are registered to Cynthia Montgomery. If you look at the license in your hand, you will see I am Cynthia Montgomery. There has been a mistake. The only mistake is you thinking you can talk your way out of this," Lawson snarled. He grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and reached inside. Lawson's large, calloused hand clamped down on Cynthia's left wrist. The grip was shockingly tight, crushing her delicate watch against her skin. "Hey!" Cynthia gasped, more in shock than pain as she was forcefully hauled out of the driver's seat. Her low heels slipped on the wet pavement, and she barely caught her balance before Lawson spun her around, slamming her chest against the wet, cold side of the BMW. "Spread your legs. Put your hands flat on the roof," Lawson shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet suburban street. Several porch lights flicked on in the distance. "This is completely unnecessary and a violation of my rights," Cynthia stated, her voice shaking with a mixture of cold, adrenaline, and mounting fury. She did not resist. She knew better than to resist. She was a judge. She knew that the street was not the courtroom. The street was where people died over misunderstandings. Officer Higgins, the younger partner, finally jobbed over, looking alarmed. "Derek, hey, what's going on? Did she pull a weapon?" "Stolen vehicle, Brian. She's resisting," Lawson lied effortlessly, kicking Cynthia's feet further apart. "I'm absolutely not resisting," Cynthia said clearly, projecting her voice so Higgins could hear. "I am complying with every unconstitutional demand your partner is making." Lawson roughly patted her down, his hands aggressive and demeaning. Finding no weapons, he grabbed her wrists, twisting her arms painfully behind her back. The cold steel of handcuffs bit brutally into her skin. He ratcheted them down so tightly that Cynthia immediately felt a sharp, shooting pain radiating up her forearms, the initial trauma to her radial nerve that would later require months of physical therapy. "Officer Lawson, these cuffs are excessively tight," Cynthia said, wincing. "You are injuring me." Save it for the judge, Lawson mocked, shoving her forward toward the cruiser. Cynthia stopped walking. She planted her feet on the wet asphalt, turning her head to look directly into Lawson's eyes. The rain plastered her hair to her cheeks, ruining her silk blouse, but her gaze was absolute steel. "I am the judge, Officer Lawson," Cynthia said, her voice cutting through the sound of the falling rain. "I am United States District Judge Cynthia Montgomery of the Federal Circuit. My federal identification is in the inner zip pocket of the purse you left in my car. I suggest you ask your partner to retrieve it and verify my identity before you escalate this catastrophic career mistake any further." For a split second, Lawson hesitated. The sheer authority in her voice, the unblinking confidence, it wasn't the usual desperate pleading of someone caught in a lie. But his ego, heavily fortified by years of unchecked authority, violently rejected the notion. A black woman in this neighborhood? A federal judge? Not in his world. Lawson threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Right. And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Get in the damn car, Your Honor. Oh, bah. He grabbed her by the collar of her suit jacket and forced her into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was freezing. Because her hands were cuffed behind her, she was forced to sit at an excruciating, unnatural angle, her shoulders screaming in protest. Lawson slammed the door shut, locking her in the dark, suffocating cage of the patrol car. Outside, Higgins was standing near the BMW. Cynthia watched through the rain-streaked window as Higgins pointed to her purse on the seat. She could see his lips moving, likely asking if they should check her ID. Lawson aggressively shook his head, waving his hand dismissively. He walked to the trunk of his cruiser, pulled out a roll of yellow crime scene tape, and began haphazardly tagging the door handle of the BMW for towing. Cynthia sat in the back of the cruiser, the pain in her wrists growing from a dull ache to a fiery burn. She closed her eyes and began to breathe deeply, deliberately slowing her heart rate. She was no longer just an exhausted woman trying to get home. She was a brilliant legal mind, and she had just been handed a front-row seat to the very systemic abuses she spent her life adjudicating. She began to mentally catalogue every violation. No probable cause for the stop. Fabrication of a stolen vehicle hit. Excessive force in the application of handcuffs. Failure to investigate exculpatory evidence, her ID. False arrest, deprivation of rights under color of law. Lawson got into the driver's seat, dripping wet, smelling of rain and adrenaline. Higgins slid into the passenger side, casting a nervous glance at Cynthia through the plexiglass divider. "Dispatch, Unit 42, Lawson called into the radio. "I'm bringing in one female suspect, grand theft daughter resisting arrest. Send a flatbed to Oak Ridge and Elm for a vehicle impound." "Copy that, Unit 42. Dispatch crackled back. "You are going to regret this," Higgins whispered to Lawson, keeping his voice low. "Did you actually run the plate?" "I ran it in my head," Lawson snapped back, putting the car in drive. Nobody her age, her demographic, buys a car like that with clean money. She's a mule or she stole it. I'm doing my job. Cynthia heard him. I ran it in my head. He hadn't even bothered to query the system. It was pure, unadulterated racial profiling. The drive to the 12th precinct took 20 agonizing minutes. Every pothole sent a jolt of agony through Cynthia's tightly restrained shoulders. She remained completely silent. The time for arguing on the side of the road had passed. The trap had been set, and Officer Derek Lawson had walked right into it. Now it was time to let the system he blindly trusted devour him. The 12th precinct was a brutalist concrete structure that smelled permanently of pine bleach, stale coffee, and old sweat. At 12:30 a.m., the bullpen was a chaotic mix of exhausted detectives, intoxicated vagrants, and ringing telephones. Lawson dragged Cynthia out of the cruiser by her upper arm and marched her through the heavy double doors. Her appearance drew immediate stares. Despite the wet, ruined suit and the handcuffs, Cynthia walked with her head held high, her posture impeccably straight. She did not look like a car thief. She looked exactly like what she was, royalty of the federal judiciary having a very bad night. "Got a live one for you, Miller," Lawson said, shoving Cynthia toward the booking desk. Desk Sergeant Thomas Miller, a 20-year veteran with tired eyes and a receding hairline, looked up from his paperwork. He took one look at Cynthia, his brow furrowing. He had booked thousands of people, and his instincts told him something was deeply off about this picture. "What's the charge, Lawson?" Miller asked, sliding a booking sheet forward. "Grand theft auto." Resisting, Lawson replied casually, leaning against the tall counter. "Found her driving a stolen 25 BMW up on Oak Ridge." Miller looked at Cynthia. "Ma'am, step up to the desk." "Name?" "Cynthia Montgomery," she replied. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of the panic or anger usually present at the booking desk. It was the icy, measured tone of a judge about to hold a lawyer in contempt. "Address." She gave her Oak Ridge Boulevard address. "Lawson, take the cuffs off so she can sign the intake forms," Miller ordered. Lawson rolled his eyes, stepped behind Cynthia, and unlocked the cuffs. Cynthia let out a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain as the steel released. Deep, purple indentations ringed her wrists, already beginning to swell. She brought her arms forward slowly, rubbing her hands to restore circulation. She did not rub her wrists. She held them out, placing them flat on the counter under the bright fluorescent light so Sergeant Miller could clearly see the bruising. Miller's eyes flicked to the injuries. His jaw tightened. "Lawson, she requires medical evaluation for those wrists." "She's fine. She was squirming," Lawson defended defensively. "Sergeant," Cynthia spoke up, locking eyes with Miller. "I informed Officer Lawson on the street that I am a United States District Judge. I informed him that the vehicle is mine, and that my federal identification is in my purse, which he illegally seized and left in my vehicle before having it impounded." The precinct suddenly went very, very quiet. The detective at the nearby desk stopped typing. A uniform pouring coffee froze mid-pour. Lawson let out a loud, mocking guffaw. "Yes, Sarge, she's been playing this 'I'm a judge' card since I pulled her over. Total nutjob." Sergeant Miller did not laugh. He looked at Cynthia's face, really looked at her. Recognition slowly dawned, followed by a wave of cold terror that visibly drained the color from his cheeks. He recognized her from the local news. She was the judge who had recently presided over the federal corruption trial of the neighboring county's mayor. "Lawson," Miller's voice was a harsh whisper, "did you run her plates?" "I told you it's a stolen." "Did you run the plates through NCIC?" Miller interrupted, emphasizing every word, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his keyboard. "The system was slow. I made a judgment call based on—" "You idiot," Miller breathed. He aggressively typed Cynthia's name and date of birth, which he gleaned from her verbal statements, into the terminal. A single father named. Her driver's license photo popped up. No warrants, no flags. Valid registration for a 2025 BMW 7 Series. Miller swallowed hard. He looked at Cynthia. Your Honor." Lawson scoffed again, though it sounded slightly less confident this time. "Come on, Sarge. Don't tell me you're buying this." "Shut your damn mouth, Lawson," Miller roared, startling half the precinct. He pointed a shaking finger at the patrolman. "Go to the captain's office. Right now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your phone. Get out of my sight." Lawson finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. He looked from Miller to Cynthia. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a sickening realization. He backed away slowly, turning and retreating down the hallway without another word. Miller turned back to Cynthia, his expression one of pure, unadulterated panic. "Judge Montgomery, I cannot express how deeply sorry." "Save your apologies, Sergeant," Cynthia interrupted, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "I want my phone. I want my vehicle returned to my driveway immediately. I want photographs taken of my wrists right now for the evidentiary record. And I want the Chief of Police down here, in person. Your Honor, Chief McAllister is likely asleep. Then you will wake him up," Cynthia commanded, "because if he is not standing in this precinct in 30 minutes, my next call is to the Director of the FBI, and my third call is to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division to place this entire department under a federal consent decree. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Miller stammered, frantically reaching for his radio and the precinct's masterphone simultaneously. Cynthia stood in front of the booking desk, nursing her bruised wrists. She had been humiliated, assaulted, and stripped of her dignity in the rain. But as she watched the precinct scramble into a state of absolute emergency, a grim determination settled over her. Officer Lawson wanted to treat her like a criminal. He was about to find out exactly how the justice system worked when the full, unyielding weight of the law was brought down upon him. The clock on the wall ticked toward 1000 a.m. The real trial was just beginning. Captain David Henderson's office was a cramped, windowless room that usually smelled of stale cigars and cheap aftershave. Tonight, however, it reeked of pure, unadulterated panic. Officer Derek Lawson paced the length of the faded carpet, his boots squeaking against the linoleum threshold every time he turned. He had been locked in here for 45 minutes. His radio had been confiscated by Sergeant Miller. His sidearm and badge were sitting on the captain's desk, surrendered under explicit orders. "She's bluffing," Lawson muttered to himself, running a hand through his damp hair. "She's just a lawyer, a judge, whatever. She was combative. I had probable cause. The neighborhood. The car." He stopped pacing and stared at the blank wall. The mantra wasn't working. The terrifying reality of Sergeant Miller's pale face was burned into his retinas. Federal judge, lifetime appointment. He had aggressively manhandled a woman whose signature could authorize federal wiretaps on this very precinct. Suddenly, a terrifying thought struck him. The body cam. Lawson's hand flew to his chest. The small black square was still clipped to his uniform, its green light mercifully dark. But it had been rolling during the stop. It had recorded everything: his refusal to look at her ID, the excessively tight handcuffs, and worst of all, his flippant comment to Higgins, "I ran it in my head." If that footage made it to Internal Affairs, his career wasn't just over. He was looking at federal civil rights charges. He needed to wipe the local drive before it synced to the precinct's main server at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, down in the precinct's hastily cleared break room, Honorable Cynthia Montgomery was conducting an entirely different kind of operation. She sat at a plastic folding table, her ruined suit jacket draped over a chair. A terrified young paramedic was delicately wrapping her bruised, swollen wrists in ice packs, meticulously photographing the deep purple gouges left by the steel cuffs before applying the bandages. At exactly 1:12 a.m., the heavy glass doors of the precinct shattered the tense silence as they swung open violently. Chief of Police Robert McAllister marched in. He was a barrel-chested man in his late 50s, wearing a hastily thrown-on trench coat over pajama pants and a white undershirt. His face was flushed crimson. "Where is she?" McAllister barked at the desk sergeant. Miller pointed a shaking finger toward the break room. McAllister strode over, taking a deep, steadying breath before pushing the door open. He had known Cynthia Montgomery for years. They had sat on the same municipal justice reform panels a decade ago. "Cynthia, Judge Montgomery." "My God," McAllister breathed. taking in the sight of her wet, disheveled state and the ice packs on her wrists. "I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am. This is a catastrophic failure of procedure. It is a misunderstanding of the highest—" "Stop right there, Robert," Cynthia interrupted. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the concussive force of a gavel strike. "Do not insult my intelligence by calling this a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is writing down the wrong license plate number. What your officer did was an act of racially motivated assault, false imprisonment, and a blatant deprivation of my civil rights under color of law." McAllister swallowed hard, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "You're right. You are absolutely right. I've already suspended Officer Lawson pending a full investigation. We will handle this internally with the utmost severity." "Internally?" Cynthia let out a cold, sharp laugh. "No, Robert. The era of internal handling ended the moment those cuffs went on my wrists. I have already contacted the regional director of the FBI. Special agents are en route to secure this precinct's servers. Which brings me to a very time-sensitive matter." McAllister looked confused. "The servers?" "Wes," Cynthia said, leaning forward. "Officer Lawson's body camera. Knowing the culture of departments that allow men like Lawson to thrive, I calculate there is an 80% chance he is currently attempting to access a terminal to delete the footage of my arrest before it uploads to the cloud." McAllister's eyes widened. "He wouldn't dare. He doesn't have the administrative access. Are you willing to bet your pension on that, Chief?" Cynthia challenged. Suddenly a shout erupted from the hallway. "Hey, get away from that terminal." McAllister bolted out of the break room, Cynthia following at a measured pace. Outside the dispatch center, 2 officers had Derek Lawson pinned against the wall. The IT technician was pointing frantically at a glowing computer screen. "Chief, he just used Captain Henderson's master login," the tech shouted. "He tried to initiate a hard wipe of his bodycam's local cache." A deathly silence fell over the bullpen. Spoliation of evidence. "A felony," Lawson was panting, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. He locked eyes with Cynthia, who was standing behind the chief, her posture perfect despite the ice packs. "It doesn't matter," Lawson shouted, his composure shattering completely. "It's my word against hers. The camera malfunctioned in the rain." "Happens all the time," Cynthia smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile that had preceded the downfall of countless corrupt executives in her courtroom. "Officer Lawson," Cynthia said, her voice echoing in the concrete room, "you are clearly unaware that the 2025 BMW 7 Series comes equipped with a factory-installed 360-degree drive recorder security system. It activates upon rapid deceleration, or when the car is placed in park during an active engine cycle. It records high-definition audio and video from 4 different exterior cameras, and it uploads directly to my secure iCloud account in real time." Lawson's face went the color of ash. "You didn't just assault a federal judge, officer," Cynthia continued softly. "You did it in 4K resolution with Dolby surround sound. And I've already emailed the footage to the Department of Justice." McAllister closed his eyes, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away a massive migraine. He looked at the 2 officers holding Lawson. "Take him to the holding cells," McAllister ordered, his voice hollow. "Strip him of his belt and shoelaces. Book him for tampering with evidence." By sunrise, the story had detonated across the state. It wasn't just a local scandal, it was a national headline. "Federal judge, brutalist in racist traffic. Stop, police department under siege." Cynthia Montgomery did not retreat to her chambers to hide. Instead, she took an immediate medical leave of absence, citing the severe radial nerve damage in her wrists caused by the handcuffs, and hired Jonathan Pierce, the most ruthless civil rights litigator on the Eastern Seaboard. Pierce was a shark in a bespoke suit known for bankrupting corrupt municipalities. But Cynthia didn't just want a massive taxpayer-funded settlement. She wanted the system itself dragged into the light. She filed a lawsuit in federal court in a district where she did not preside to avoid conflicts of interest, naming Officer Derek Lawson, Chief Robert McAllister, and the city itself as defendants. The damages sought were highly specific, $910,000. The media was puzzled by the number. Why not an even million? Why not $5 million? During a high-profile press conference on the courthouse steps, Pierce explained the math with surgical precision. We are seeking exactly $10,000 from the city to cover Judge Montgomery's medical expenses, physical therapy, lost wages, and punitive damages for the systemic failure to train and discipline its officers, Pierce announced, the flashbulbs reflecting in his glasses. The remaining $100,000 is being sought directly from Officer Derek Lawson's personal police pension fund. We are not just taking his badge, we are taking his retirement. We are sending a message that when you violate the Constitution, you pay for it out of your own pocket. The legal battle that followed was vicious. The city's defense attorney, William Harrington, attempted to employ the standard playbook: delay, obfuscate, and attack the plaintiff's character. Harrington filed motions to dismiss, claiming qualified immunity for Officer Lawson. He argued that Lawson had made a good-faith error in a high-crime adjacent area. But the federal judge presiding over the civil case, Judge Samuel Rosenberg, was having none of it. With the incontrovertible evidence of the BMW's camera footage and the attempted deletion of the body cam data, Rosenberg pierced the veil of qualified immunity in a blistering 40-page ruling. The turning point of the lawsuit, however, came during the discovery phase, inside a sterile conference room during sworn depositions. Jonathan Pierce sat across from Officer Brian Higgins, the young rookie who had been riding with Lawson that night. Higgins looked exhausted, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame. The blue wall of silence, the unspoken rule that officers do not testify against one another, was leaning heavily on him. He had been receiving anonymous, threatening phone calls for weeks. "Officer Higgins," Pierce began, his tone disarmingly gentle. "Let's return to the moment Judge Montgomery was placed in the back of your cruiser. Do you recall asking Officer Lawson if he had actually run the vehicle's license plate through the NCIC database?" Higgins shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the city's lawyer, Harrington, who gave a slight, tense nod. "Yes, sir. I recall asking him," Higgins said softly. "And what was Officer Lawson's exact response?" Pierce asked. Harrington leaned forward. "Objection, hearsay. Overruled for the purpose of this deposition, Mr. B." "Harrington, you know that?" Pierce snapped. "Answer the question, officer." Higgins swallowed hard. He looked past Pierce, his eyes briefly meeting Cynthia Montgomery's. She was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, her wrists still wrapped in specialized compression braces. She didn't look angry. She looked expectant. She was waiting for him to decide what kind of man he was going to be. Higgins took a deep breath. The blue wall shattered. "Officer Lawson said, I ran it in my head," Higgins testified, his voice trembling but clear. "He said, nobody her age, her demographic, buys a car like that with clean money. She's a mule or she stole it." The court reporter's fingers flew across the stenograph. Harrington closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was the kill shot, the textbook definition of racial profiling, admitted on the record by a fellow officer. But Cynthia and Pierce weren't done. The real twist was yet to be revealed. "Thank you for your honesty, Officer Higgins," Pierce said. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the heavy oak table. "Now, are you familiar with something the 12th Precinct refers to colloquially as the shadow file?" Harrington's eyes snapped open. "What is this?" This was not in discovery. Actually, Bill, it was anonymously mailed to my office 2 days ago. Pierce smiled coldly. By an internal affairs investigator who was tired of the cover-ups. Pierce opened the folder. This file contains 14 separate civilian complaints against Officer Derek Lawson over the past 7 years. All from Black and Hispanic motorists in the Oak Ridge area, all alleging excessive force, fabricated probable cause, and racial slurs. And every single one of them was buried by Captain Henderson, marked unfounded without a single interview being conducted. Pierce leaned over the table, staring directly at the camera recording the deposition. Officer Lawson wasn't a bad apple. He was the prize pupil of a rotten orchard. And Judge Montgomery is about to burn the orchard to the ground. The federal courthouse in downtown was a stark contrast to the brutalist, oppressive architecture of the 12th Precinct. It was a cathedral of justice, built of polished marble and rich mahogany, with towering windows that let in columns of stark, unyielding sunlight. For Judge Cynthia Montgomery, it was familiar territory. It was her arena, but as she sat at the plaintiff's table beside Jonathan Pierce, the heavy oak table felt entirely different from this side of the bench. The revelation of the shadow file had sent shockwaves through the city's legal establishment. William Harrington, the lead defense attorney for the city, had spent the entire weekend desperately filing emergency motions to suppress the file, arguing it was obtained through illicit means and violated attorney-client privilege regarding internal investigations. Judge Samuel Rosenberg, a man whose patience was as thin as his graying hair, was not having it. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Rosenberg's voice boomed over the hushed murmurs of the packed gallery on Monday morning. "You stand before me and argue that 14 separate complaints of racial profiling and excessive force against your client are inadmissible because they were inadvertently excluded from your discovery production. And you further argue that because a whistleblower had the moral fortitude to mail them to Mr. Pierce, they are somehow toxic." Harrington gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. "Your Honor, Captain Henderson's files were part of an ongoing internal review. They are raw, unsubstantiated civilian claims. Admitting them prejudices the jury against Officer Lawson based on unproven allegations." "They are unproven, Counselor," Rosenberg snapped, leaning over the bench, "because Captain Henderson marked them unfounded without conducting a single interview. This court will not reward the deliberate concealment of evidence. The file is admitted. The jury will see it. And if I find out your office had prior knowledge of this file before Mr. Traar," Pierce brought it to light, "I will be referring you to the state bar for sanctions." "Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Harrington muttered, retreating to his seat like a beaten dog. The trial proceeded with the relentless precision of an execution. Jonathan Pierce called Officer Brian Higgins as his first witness. Higgins, no longer wearing his uniform but dressed in a sharp civilian suit, looked visibly terrified but resolute. Under oath, in front of a jury of 12 citizens, Higgins repeated what he had said in the deposition. He testified to the excessively tight handcuffs. He testified to Lawson's refusal to check Cynthia's ID. And, most devastatingly, he repeated the phrase that would become the cornerstone of the trial. "I ran it in my head." Harrington attempted to cross-examine Higgins, trying to paint him as a disgruntled rookie who was bullied by internal affairs into turning on his partner. But Higgins held firm. "I swore an oath to uphold the law, Mr. Harrington," Higgins said softly, looking directly at the jury. "Officer Lawson broke the law that night. He broke it because of the color of her skin. If I cover that up, my badge doesn't mean anything." By the third day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom had reached a fever pitch. It was time for the main event. "The plaintiff calls Officer Derek Lawson to the stand," Pierce announced. Lawson walked to the witness box with a swagger that had significantly diminished over the past year. Stripped of his gun, his badge, and his authority, dressed in an ill-fitting grey suit. He looked less like a fearsome enforcer of the law and more like an overgrown, defensive bully. He swore to tell the truth, taking his seat and glaring at Pierce. Pierce approached the podium slowly, adjusting his glasses. He didn't start with the night of the arrest. He started with the shadow file. "Mr. Lawson," Pierce began, his voice dangerously calm. "On June 14, 2019, a motorist named David Warren filed a complaint against you. He stated you pulled him over for a broken taillight, which was not broken, dragged him from his car, and called him a thug. Do you remember this?" "I interact with hundreds of people a week. I don't remember every traffic stop," Lawson replied defensively. "Very well. On September 2nd, 2021, a woman named Maria Sanchez filed a complaint stating you handcuffed her so tightly she lost feeling in her fingers for a week, all because she asked why you were searching her trunk without a warrant. Do you recall that? People exaggerate when they get caught doing something wrong," Lawson sneered. "But they weren't caught doing anything wrong, were they, Mr. Lawson?" Pierce shot back, holding up a stack of papers. "Because in all 14 of these complaints, buried in the shadow file, no citations were issued. No arrests were made. You just stopped them, terrified them, physically assaulted them, and let them go." "Why?" "Objection." "Badgering," Harrington shouted. "Overruled," Rosenberg growled. "Answer the question, Mr. Lawson." "I was doing proactive policing," Lawson said, his face flushing red. "I patrol high-crime areas. Sometimes you have to be assertive to maintain control of a scene." "Assertive," Pierce repeated, letting the word hang in the air. He turned his back to Lawson and walked over to the plaintiff's table. "Let's talk about the night you were assertive with Judge Montgomery. You testified in your deposition that you reasonably believed the 2025 BMW was stolen because it was flagged by the NCIC database. Is that still your sworn testimony today?" Lawson hesitated. He knew about the BMW's internal camera footage. He knew Higgins had flipped, but he also knew perjury was a felony, and admitting he lied under oath would destroy him. I believed there was a flag. The system in the cruiser was glitching. I made a split-second judgment call based on the vehicle matching a description." "A description?" Pierce said. He pressed a button on the remote control in his hand. The large monitor facing the jury flickered to life. "Your Honor, Defense Counsel, I would like to introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. This is the dashcam audio from Officer Lawson's cruiser, precisely 2 minutes before he initiated his lights and sirens." Harrington stood up, looking utterly confused. "Your Honor, the dashcam was submitted, but the audio was corrupted by the rain. We stipulated to this." Pierce smiled, a cold, predatory grin. "The forward-facing microphone was corrupted by the rain, Mr. Burt." Harrington, "But the 12th Precinct cruisers are also equipped with a rear-facing cabin microphone to monitor suspects in the back seat. That microphone was perfectly functional. We had an independent audio forensics firm isolate the cabin track and amplify the front seat conversation." Lawson's eyes widened in sheer panic. He gripped the wooden railing of the witness box so hard his knuckles popped. Pierce pressed play. The audio was slightly staticky, but the voices were unmistakable. "Higgins, man, this rain is brutal. Think we should head back to the precinct." Lawson, hold on, look at this." "Higgins, what? The BMW?" "It's just driving. Lawson, Oak Ridge Boulevard at midnight. Brand new 7 Series. And look who's driving it." "Higgins, I can't see anything through the tint." "Lawson, I can. I saw her at the stoplight. Black woman, dressed up. Probably thinks she owns the place. Nobody like that affords a car like that around here without moving weight or stealing it." "Higgins, Derek, come on. We don't have a reason to stop." "Lawson, I'll make a reason. Let's see how fast she runs when I light her up." The audio clicked off. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The jury box looked as though all 12 members had been physically struck. One juror, an older woman in the front row, was staring at Lawson with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Cynthia Montgomery sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face an unreadable mask of judicial stoicism. But inside, her heart was pounding a steady rhythm of vindication. "You didn't make a split-second judgment call about a stolen vehicle, did you, Mr. Lawson?" Pierce asked, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. "You made a judgment call about the color of her skin. You manufactured probable cause to terrorize a woman who you believed had no power to stop you. Isn't that the truth?" Lawson opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Harrington, who was staring down at his legal pad, actively refusing to make eye contact. He looked at the jury, who were glaring at him with open hostility. Finally, he looked at Cynthia Montgomery. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with pity. And to an arrogant man whose entire identity was built on false superiority, that pity was the ultimate execution. Lawson stammered, his voice cracking. "I plead the fifth." The gallery erupted. Judge Rosenberg slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "Order! Order in this court!" Rosenberg bellowed. He turned to Lawson, his expression a thunderstorm of judicial wrath. "The jury will disregard the witness's invocation of the Fifth Amendment in this civil proceeding, but they may draw adverse inferences from his refusal to answer. Mr. Pierce, do you have any further questions for this individual?" "No, Your Honor," Pierce said softly, buttoning his suit jacket. "I believe Officer Lawson has told us everything we need to know." Closing arguments were scheduled for the following afternoon. The trial had moved with unprecedented speed, entirely because the defense's case had been utterly annihilated by their own client's arrogance and the sheer mountain of suppressed evidence. William Harrington's closing statement was an exercise in miserable duty. He did not defend Lawson. He could not. Instead, he attempted damage control for the city. He argued that Lawson was a rogue actor, a bad apple who had managed to deceive his superiors. He pleaded with the jury not to punish the hard-working taxpayers of the city for the deplorable actions of one man. He asked for a minimum settlement, arguing that the $910,000 requested was punitive and excessive. When Jonathan Pierce stood up for his closing argument, he didn't walk to the podium. He walked directly to the jury box, his hands resting lightly on the wooden rail. "A rogue actor," Pierce repeated, shaking his head slowly. "The defense wants you to believe that Officer Lawson was a lone wolf operating in a vacuum. But wolves do not survive unless the pack protects them." He pointed toward the empty witness stand. 14 complaints. 14 times citizens of this city stepped forward risking retaliation to say, "This man is hurting us." And 14 times Captain Henderson and Chief McAllister threw those complaints into the trash. They didn't just protect a bad apple, they built the barrel that housed it. But Pierce walked back to his table and stood behind Cynthia Montgomery. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Judge Cynthia Montgomery has spent 35 years of her life serving the law," Pierce said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with emotional gravity. "She has dedicated her existence to the belief that the system, though flawed, is fundamentally built on justice. And yet, on a rainy night, on her own street, none of her achievements mattered to the man with the badge and the gun. To Derek Lawson, she wasn't a judge. She wasn't a citizen. She was a target." He looked back at the jury, his eyes locking with each of them individually. "The defense says $910,000 is excessive. I say it is a bargain. We are asking for $810,000 from the city, because the city must feel the financial sting of its negligence. If it does not hurt the city's budget, the city will not change its policies. But more importantly, we are asking for $100,000 directly from Derek Lawson's pension. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Going after a police pension was notoriously difficult, almost unprecedented in civil rights cases without a prior criminal conviction. Why the pension? Pierce asked, anticipating their thought. Because for too long, officers who abuse their power are allowed to simply resign. They walk away with their retirement intact, funded by the very taxpayers they brutalized. Not today. Today you have the power to send a message that echoes through every precinct in this country. You have the power to say, if you break the law under the color of authority, you will not just lose your job, you will lose your future. He stepped back, his posture perfectly straight. Fine for the plaintiff. Award the full amount. Give Judge Montgomery her justice, and give this city the wake-up call it so desperately needs. Thank you. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. When the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached, the tension in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Cynthia sat beside Pierce, her face calm, though her heart beat fiercely against her ribs. Derek Lawson sat at the defense table, his head bowed, staring blankly at his hands. Judge Rosenberg took the bench as the jury reached a verdict. Oh, the foreperson, the older woman from the front row, stood up. She was holding a single sheet of paper. We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdict. The foreperson cleared her throat. In the civil case of Montgomery v. Lawson and the city, on the count of false arrest and imprisonment, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of excessive force, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of deprivation of civil rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments, we find for the plaintiff. Harrington closed his eyes. It was a clean sweep. Regarding compensatory and punitive damages, the foreperson continued, her voice growing louder, more authoritative. We order the city to pay the plaintiff the sum of $800,000. Furthermore, regarding the personal liability of defendant Derek Lawson, we order the garnishment of his municipal police pension in the exact amount of $100,000. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. They had done it. They had actually pierced the pension shield. Lawson buried his face in his hands. His career was gone. His reputation was ashes, and now his retirement had been stripped away, handed over to the woman he had tried to humiliate in the rain. Judge Rosenberg struck his gavel. The court accepts the verdict. The jury is dismissed with the profound thanks of this court. Mr. Harrington, I expect the city's check to be cleared within 30 days. We are adjourned. As the courtroom erupted into chaotic chatter, reporters rushing for the doors to file their stories, Jonathan Pierce turned to Cynthia. He smiled, a genuine, exhausted smile. We did it, Your Honor. Cynthia looked at her wrists. The deep purple bruises had long since faded, though a dull ache still flared up when it rained. The physical scars were healing, but the victory she had won today was permanent. She stood up, smoothing the skirt of her impeccable suit. Yes, Jonathan, we did. The fallout from the verdict was catastrophic for the 12th precinct. Less than 48 hours after the trial concluded, Chief Robert McAllister announced his early retirement. Effective immediately, Captain David Henderson was suspended without pay, pending a full investigation by the Department of Justice, which swooped in to place the entire police department under a strict federal consent decree. As for Derek Lawson, the civil trial was only the beginning of his nightmare. Armed with the dashcam audio, the physical evidence of the handcuffs, and the sworn testimony of Brian Higgins, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed federal criminal charges against Lawson for criminal deprivation of rights under color of law. He was facing up to 10 years in federal prison. The man who had wielded his badge like a weapon was about to find out what it felt like to be locked in a cage. 2 months later, the morning sun shone brightly over Oak Ridge Boulevard. The rain that had once slicked the asphalt was a distant memory. Honorable Cynthia Montgomery backed her sapphire blue 2025 BMW 7 Series out of her driveway. She adjusted the rearview mirror, her hands resting comfortably at 10 and 2 on the leather steering wheel. She felt the slight twinge in her left wrist, a permanent lingering reminder of the cost of accountability. She drove past the stone-pillared entrance of the country club. A police cruiser was parked on the shoulder, monitoring traffic. The officer inside saw the pristine BMW approaching. He looked at his radar gun, saw she was doing exactly 35 miles per hour, and respectfully offered a small, polite nod as she drove past. Cynthia did not nod back. She simply kept her eyes on the road ahead. She had a massive corporate fraud docket waiting for her at the federal courthouse, and she was already running 5 minutes late. Justice never slept, and neither did she. Judge Cynthia Montgomery's terrifying encounter is a powerful reminder that systemic bias can target anyone, regardless of their position or prestige. But her brilliant legal counterattack proves that corrupt systems can be held fully accountable when we relentlessly fight back. She didn't just win a massive settlement. She dismantled a dangerous, deep-rooted cover-up and forced a toxic department to change its ways forever. What do you think about the jury taking Officer Lawson's personal pension? Did he get what he deserved? Let us know in the comments. If you were inspired by this incredible fight for justice, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more shocking, real-life stories.